ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming out to hear an old man talk about himself. I hope I make it worth your while. I have often been introduced around the country as the Great Agnostic. Numerous well-meaning individuals have attempted to rescue me from the theological abyss of unbelief by saying, I did not deny, I only failed to believe. They've asserted, I'm not an atheist, I'm merely an agnostic. Let me hereby declare to you that on the subject of God, I consider the belief of the atheist and the agnostic to be the same. Whatever national prominence I've achieved in my 65 years can be traced back to the Republican National Convention of 1876. Oh, I'd made a small name for myself in the Midwest before that, but it was that convention that put me in the national spotlight, for a few years anyway. You see, I was living in Peoria, Illinois, had a reputation as a pretty good country lawyer, and I'd been active in Illinois Republican politics for several years. I was the Illinois Attorney General after the war from 67 to 69, even tried to get nominated for governor in 68, but I was only a colonel and Major General John Palmer cleaned my clock. Well, to get back to the convention of 1876, because Illinois was a crucial state in the election, I was handed the honor of nominating James G. Blaine of New Hampshire as a Republican candidate for president. I worked hard on that speech, and on June 15th, 1876, I stood up in that convention hall in Cincinnati, and I gave it everything I had. Must have sounded all right, too. Here's what the Chicago paper had to say about me the next day. Chicago Times, June 16th, 1876. Possessed of a fine figure, I guess I put on a little weight since then. In 1879, my friend and fellow freethinker, Thaddeus Burr Wakeman, and I worked hard trying to establish a third party, the National Liberal Party, whose main objectives were, first, the utter divorce of church and state. Second, the divorce of church and school. Third, the taxation of all private property. Fourth, the repeal of all laws abridging work on one day of the week and of laws denying to any man any civil right because of his belief or unbelief. I look back on that nomination speech as the highlight of my public speaking career. Of course, by that time, I was used to speaking in public. I'd already been a practicing trial lawyer for 22 years. My brother Clark and I had studied up and taken the examination, and we were both admitted to the Illinois bar in 1854. I was 21 and Clark just 2 years older. So up to 1876, except for my year and a half in the Union Army, I got a lot of trial experience under my belt. I represented several Illinois railroads and, not ashamed to admit, made a lot of money, usually anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000 a year. Not bad for a son of an itinerant Orthodox Calvinist preacher. Oh, the Calvinistic routine was oppressive, particularly on Sundays. Here's how I once wrote about it. When I was a boy, Sunday was considered altogether too holy to be happy in. The child that looked the sickest was regarded as the most pious. Dyspepsia was in the very air you breathed. I've noticed all my life that Many people think they have religion when actually they're just bothered by dyspepsia. If there could be found an absolute specific for that disease, it would be the cruelest blow the church has ever received. By the time the war started, I was a dyed-in-the-wool agnostic. In fact, I gave my first anti-theological speech in Pekin, Illinois in 1860. I called it Progress. I am aware there are many opinions as to what progress really is. What one calls progress, another denominates barbarism. You are all perfectly familiar with the history of religious persecution for no other reason in the world than for a difference of opinion upon a subject neither party knew anything about. In those times, failing to convert a man or a woman by the ordinary means, they used every engine of torture the ingenuity of bigotry could devise. They crushed their feet in what they called iron boots. They roasted them upon slow fires. They plucked out their nails. And all this to convince them of the truth, I suppose, that we should love our neighbors as ourselves. Despite being defeated for Congress, I'll always remember 1860 as one of the happiest years of my life. That was the year I met my wife-to-be, Eva Parker. She was the daughter of a prosperous Groveland family, and lucky for me, they were a family of free thinkers. Not quite 2 years later, we were married on February 13th, 1862. Yes, ladies, I always remember our anniversary. A few days after that, I was ordered to the Western War Theater. My war experiences are rather drab compared to most. I spent the last 3 months of 1861 raising 3 cavalry regiments, and in December we were mustered into the Federal Army. I was now Colonel Robert Ingersoll, 11th Regiment, Illinois Volunteer Cavalry. In October of '63, our first daughter was born, Eva Robert Ingersoll. A little over a year later, November of '64, Maud Robert Ingersoll arrived. As with most parents, they've been the joy of my life ever since. And now, I have 2 lovely grandchildren. In 1872, I began my major assault on the fortress of theology. That was the year I wrote The Gods, which I hope some of you have read. If not, here's a little sample to pique your interest. An honest God is the noblest work of man. From that time to the present, I've been writing just about every chance I get. Individuality was published in 1873, Heretics and Heresies in 1874, Vision of War in 1876, Ghosts and the Liberty of Man, Woman, and Child in 1877. I gave the Christians a little break, and even I toured Europe while I wrote about my favorite poet, Robert Burns. I once read where a Christian minister said, "That should be the epitaph on my tombstone. Robert Burns." Speaking of Scotsmen, you know, Andrew Carnegie is a great friend of mine. I've always considered him to be the prototype of American industrial genius. We both love the Scottish poet Robert Burns, and whenever we get together, we read and talk Burns for hours. Aided, of course, by a little bottled bliss, as Andrew likes to call it. He's not the agnostic I am, but he's certainly a species of infidel, a deist, and he seems to appreciate most of my agnostic utterances. 1879 was a sad year for me. My brother Clark died, and that set me back quite a bit. He was my best friend, and I loved him dearly. I still miss him every day of the week. In 82 and 83, I had to put my writing on the back burner while I defended 8 government officials who were accused of bribery in the famous, or should I say infamous, Star Route trials. Only 2 of the 8 were convicted, I might add. Even the grand old man of England, William Gladstone, got into the fray against me one month. He said I was the one American adversary worthy of his steel. My old friend Walt Whitman, he read Gladstone's paper and he wrote, "It won't do, Mr. Gladstone. You may try, you try hard, you have every right to try, but the colonel carries too many guns for you on that line." Thomas Huxley, he also thought I got the better of Mr. Gladstone. He wrote to me, "Gladstone's attack on you is one of the best things he has ever written. I do not think there is more than 50% more verbiage than necessary, nor any sentence with more than 2 meanings. If he keeps improving at this rate, he'll be an English classic by the time he's 90. Shakespeare is my all-time favorite author. I idolize the man. Shakespeare is my Bible, Burns my hymnal. Well, before I break my arm patting myself on the back, I'd like to close with a few passages from a piece that I wrote just 3 years ago, Why I Am an Agnostic. For the most part, we inherit our opinions. Our beliefs depend on where we were born. If we had been born in Constantinople, most of us would have said, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet." If our parents lived on the banks of the Ganges, we would be worshippers of Shiva, longing for the heaven of nirvana. The Scots are Calvinists because their parents were. The Irish are Catholics because their fathers were. The English are Episcopalians because their fathers were. And the Americans are divided into 100 sects because their fathers were. I thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again in the 20th century.